I was yanking at a stubborn root near the edge of my lake when I heard it, the high-pitched screech of golf cart tires on gravel. That sound alone was enough to send a chill through me because I already knew who it was. I didn't even need to turn around. Priscilla Markley, Queen of Willow Creek Estates, self-crowned president of the HOA, visor tilted like it was a royal crown, clipboard in hand like she was holding scripture itself, and she was heading straight for me. Her cart rolled to a stop before I could even wipe the dirt off my hands. "This is private property," she barked, voice sharp and brittle. I stood up, brushing my palms against my jeans. I met her eyes without blinking. "Sure is," I said. "Mine." The way her face twisted, it was like I'd just told her gravity didn't apply to her anymore. Her lips pinched, her eyes narrowed like she had spotted a weed in her perfect flower bed. "You're not on the registry. You're not a member of Willow Creek Estates." "That's because I'm not in Willow Creek Estates," I answered, calm but firm. "I own this land and I own this lake." She blinked. The words didn't fit into her world. So I pointed at the weathered wooden sign I'd carved myself years ago, or in Asher Lake. "Private property, no trespassing. 10 years back I bought this lake and the 70 acres around it. Paid for it, deed and all. It was mine, every inch." "That can't be," she sputtered. "This lake backs up to several of our homeowners' properties. That makes it common use." "No," I said flatly. "It doesn't. They may have a view, but they don't have rights." Her movement slowed, like a queen descending from her throne. She stepped off her cart, standing straighter, voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Then why was I given jurisdiction over shoreline maintenance?" I locked eyes with her. "Because someone lied to you, and now, Priscilla, you're trespassing." She huffed, flipping through her clipboard, papers snapping like weapons. "I have a legal right to inspect all Willow Creek common areas, including bodies of water. That's in our charter." "I'm not in your HOA. This isn't your lake, and you're standing on private land." That's when her tone shifted. It hit that high-pitched, fake sweet register, the one people use when they're about to cause real trouble. "Well then, if you're not in our HOA, I'm afraid you're in violation of several codes. That fence by your dock, non-compliant. The gravel path, not approved. And the fire pit, oh, that's going to be a problem." I laughed, sharp and humorless. "You don't get to enforce anything here." But she scribbled furiously anyway, tearing a pink slip from her pad and slapped it against my mailbox like she was declaring war. "You'll be hearing from the Compliance Committee, Mr. Asher." Then she stormed off in that little cart of hers, wheels spitting gravel behind her. I stood there shaking my head, telling myself it was nothing. Just bluster, just Priscilla being Priscilla, but the truth, that was only the beginning. The next morning, I woke up to a bright red notice planted at the foot of my driveway, staked into the ground like they were claiming the land. Large block letters, code violation. Their HOA logo stamped at the bottom. My stomach twisted, but I yanked it out, tossed it into the bed of my truck, and thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 days later, I caught a landscaper trimming my hedges without permission. His uniform was neat, his clippers sharp, but his words were what cut deepest. He said he'd been hired by the HOA to bring my property up to code. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about a fence or a path. Priscilla wasn't just being annoying. She was making a move, an attempt to annex my land inch by inch, paper by paper, lie by lie. I felt my chest tighten. I'd spent years building a life here, carving out peace around this water. And now, they were trying to erase it. That night I stood by the lake, the water calm, stars glittering in its surface. I told myself one thing, steady and clear: they don't own this lake, they don't own this land, and they will never own me. But deep down, I knew this was only the first shot in a war I hadn't asked for. They didn't stop, they never do. When people like Priscilla smell power, they don't back away, they dig their claws in deeper. And I learned that lesson fast. 3 days after the landscaper trespassed, I decided I'd had enough of waiting to see what they'd try next. I climbed a ladder, strapped a motion-activated camera to the big oak that overlooked my driveway, and wired it directly to my phone. It wasn't paranoia. It was protection, because I knew deep down something was coming. The very next evening, just after the sun dipped low and the lake shimmered in fatting gold, my phone buzzed. Motion alert. I pulled up the feed and froze. There they were, a group of men in reflective vests, clipboards in hand, packing near my dock like they owned the place. And leading them? A woman, not Priscilla this time, but someone younger. Late 30s, sharp blazer, hair pulled so tight it looked painful, chin tilted high with smug authority. I grabbed my flashlight and walked down the gravel path, boots crunching. My voice carried before I even reached them. "You're trespassing. I suggest you turn around." The woman stopped mid-step, turning slowly like this was some kind of performance. Her voice was calm, rehearsed. "We're conducting a boundary assessment, official HOA business." I stopped just short of the property line, beam of my flashlight cutting through the dusk. "Your authority ends where my deed begins, and you are standing on private land." One of the men shifted uncomfortably. Clipboard snapped shut, but the woman didn't move. Her lips curled in that little smirk people wear when they think paperwork makes them invincible. "Sir, the HOA has received multiple complaints about non-compliant structures along this shoreline. We have a duty to ensure safety and uniformity." My jaw tightened. I stepped closer, voice steady but sharp enough to cut steel. "And you have a duty to stay on your own property. Now get off mine." For a long moment the night was silent except for the chirping cicadas. Then finally, one of the surveyors muttered, "Let's go." Just like that, they stomped back up the hill, tail lights disappearing into the trees. But I didn't feel relief, not for a second, because I knew they'd be back. The very next morning I drove into town, county sheriff's office. I wasn't going to wait until they built another lie. Deputy Carla Brenner sat across from me in the break room, coffee in hand, flipping through the thick stack of papers I'd brought. Deed, tax records, surveys, every proof of ownership I had. She looked up, expression unreadable. "You've got everything in order, it's clean." "Then why are they acting like they own it?" I asked. Carla leaned back, exhaling slow. "Some of these HOAs think they can expand their reach just by pretending they already have it. Scare people off, make enough noise. Nobody questions it." Her words landed heavy. "What happens if they file something with the county, something that claims jurisdiction?" She hesitated. "Legally, they'd have to file a boundary amendment or annexation request through the planning board. You'd be notified." I pressed harder. Could they do it without me knowing? Her silence said enough. Finally, she admitted, "Not legally, but I've seen groups like this try to shortcut the process." That was it. That was the moment the knot in my chest hardened into something else. Determination. I left her office and drove straight to the county records department. The clerk barely had time to greet me before I asked, "Willow Creek HOA, any expansion filings?" He tapped at his keyboard, frowning. "Actually, yes, filed 2 weeks ago." The words hit like a hammer. I asked for a copy, hands trembling as I read it at the counter. They claimed the lake and an environmental buffer zone were part of a shared watershed historically maintained by the HOA. They listed me by name as an impacted party. No signature from me, no consent, just typed words, lies stacked on lies. My stomach churned. They weren't trying to bluff me anymore, they were trying to steal. I drove home, pulled out every land survey and deed I had, and typed up a written objection. Precise, sharp, undeniable. I sent it certified mail to the planning board requesting a hearing. If they wanted a fight, they were going to get one. A week later, the appointment letter arrived. Wednesday morning, county building. I remember walking into that chamber, boots polished, shirt pressed, my paperwork clutched like armor. The room buzzed with low voices. At one end sat Priscilla, visor gone but smugness intact, flanked by the younger woman from the trespass and a man in a Bluetooth earpiece who looked like he'd never touched a shovel in his life. When the chairwoman called the meeting to order, Priscilla was first to speak. Her voice was syrupy, sweet, measured. "The Willow Creek HOA has maintained this lake perimeter for years. Landscaping, pest control, shoreline erosion prevention. We believe it's in the best interest of the community for the HOA to officially include the surrounding buffer zone." She passed around glossy binders filled with before and after photos, doctored images, including parts of my private dock. When it was my turn, I stood, calm, steady. I passed out copies of my deed, the original survey, and an annotated map showing every boundary in black and white. I have never paid dues to nor signed any agreement with Willow Creek HOA, I said. They have no legal jurisdiction over my property. What's more, I held up the motion camera photo of their crew trespassing at night. They've already crossed my line, repeatedly. I filed reports with the sheriff's office. I have photographic proof. This isn't stewardship. This is attempted theft. The Bluetooth man shot up, face red. Objection, this is character assassination. The HOA has acted in good faith. No, I said coldly. They filed this annexation without my knowledge. They listed me as a consenting party. They fabricated history that never happened. That's fraud. Silence swallowed the room. The board shuffled through my packet, whispering among themselves. Finally, the chairwoman cleared her throat. This proposal is suspended pending investigation. Mr. Asher, thank you for your documentation. As I walked out, Priscilla's eyes burned holes in my back. But I wasn't shaken, not anymore. Because I realized something in that room, something I hadn't said out loud yet. They didn't want my compliance, they wanted my land. And I was never going to let them have it. I thought the hearing would slow them down. I thought maybe, just maybe, the truth would stop them in their tracks. But I was wrong. What happened next proved they weren't just stubborn, they were desperate. It started with a garbage bag, or rather a dozen of them. My phone buzzed one late afternoon, camera alert again. When I checked the feed, I saw a golf cart at the edge of the lake. A teenager in a Willow Creek polo shirt unloading black trash bags onto my shore. I stormed down there, heart pounding, anger burning hotter than the setting sun. "What do you think you're doing?" I barked. The kid froze, half a bag still in his hands. Mrs. Markley said this was part of the HOA's composting initiative, community recycling program. I stared at him, disbelief turning sharp. "This is private property, you're dumping garbage." He stammered, shrugged, and pointed helplessly back at the cart. I snapped a photo of the license plate, then pulled out my phone and recorded his every word. Proof, because I knew exactly what this was, an attempt to make my property look mismanaged. That night, Deputy Carla Brenner met me by the water. She crouched over the bags, tugging one open with her gloved hand. The stench hit instantly. Rotting food, dead leaves, even shredded HOA flyers mixed in. She shook her head. "This isn't composting, this is illegal dumping, and if she directed it, we can charge her." I nodded, jaw tight. My patience was gone. They weren't trying to enforce rules anymore. They were manufacturing violations. But that was only strike one. 2 days later, I got a call from my lawyer, Gabriella. She specialized in HOA overreach cases, sharp as a blade and twice as dangerous when it came to the courtroom. I'd already sent her every document I had, photos, filings, even the landscaper's invoice I dug out of the trash. Her voice on the phone was calm, but there was an edge. "They crossed several legal lines. This isn't just trespassing anymore. You've got them. I'm drafting a cease and desist and a civil claim for property interference and attempted fraud. We'll file next week." For the first time, I felt hope, a sliver of light breaking through the storm. But the HOA, they weren't finished yet. They doubled down. That very afternoon, Gabriella called again. This time her voice was sharp, urgent. "You need to hear this. They submitted a forged maintenance agreement to the county board. A contract with your name on it, backdated, claiming you authorized them to manage shoreline improvements in exchange for reduced dues." I froze, hands tightening around the phone. "That's not even clever. I've never paid dues, never signed a thing." "Exactly," she said. "The signature is falsified. I flagged it immediately. This isn't just civil anymore. That's document tampering. That's impersonation." My stomach twisted, but not from fear, from clarity. They weren't going to stop unless someone forced them to. Gabriella's voice cut sharp. "I've already contacted the district attorney. If handwriting analysis confirms this, we're looking at felony charges." Felony, the word hung heavy in the air. I stepped outside, breathing in the crisp evening, staring at the still lake. The water looked untouched, serene. But beneath that calm surface, something poisonous was spreading. And the HOA was the source. That night I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat at my desk writing letters, not threats, not accusations, just facts. I wrote to every property owner bordering my land, laying out the truth, the trespass incidents, the illegal dumping, the forged documents. I attached copies of Gabriella's complaints to the DA. By morning, my voicemail was full. Hank, the retired surveyor, said he'd had his own run-ins with Priscilla when she tried to claim a trail easement that didn't exist. "She gets ambitious," he warned, "but she picked the wrong fight this time." Another message came from a woman named Patris. Her voice shook. "I never approved any of this, and now I'm getting letters demanding I pay shoreline maintenance fees, retroactive to last year. I don't even live in the HOA." That afternoon, she showed up in my driveway with 3 other neighbors. Each carried envelopes, invoices, threats dressed up as official letters. One warned of liens and legal action if fees weren't paid within 30 days. All of it fraud. I sent copies straight to Gabriella. She confirmed what I already suspected. They're manufacturing a paper trail, making it look like they've managed the shoreline all along. It's coordinated fraud, a setup. Patris's eyes filled with worry. But what happens if people believe it? I looked her in the eye, my voice steady. Then we make sure they see the truth. Later that night, I met with Carla again. She flipped through the stack of letters, her brow furrowed deep. "This isn't sloppy anymore," she said. "This is organized. Forged documents, unauthorized billing, fraud. It's going to the state attorney general." I asked the question I'd been holding inside for weeks. What happens next? Carla looked at me, voice low. "If we get a warrant for their office and we find planning documents with your name on them, that's conspiracy." The weight of it settled on me. This wasn't neighborly squabbling. This wasn't about a fence or a path. This was organized theft wrapped in the language of community. And if they thought I was going to roll over, they had no idea who they were dealing with. They thought they were untouchable, that their clipboards and binders could shield them from the law. But the morning the sheriff's cruisers pulled into Willow Creek's clubhouse, reality came knocking hard. I watched from a distance as 2 marked cars and a pair of unmarked sedans rolled up the HOA office, a converted clubhouse near their tennis courts. Officers went in without hesitation. Less than an hour later, they came back out with boxes, dozens of them, labeled, taped, stuffed with files. And then came the sight I'll never forget. Priscilla herself, pale-faced, escorted by her lawyer, her hands trembling as cameras caught every step. For the first time, she didn't look like a queen. She looked cornered. That evening, Gabriella called me. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the undercurrent of satisfaction. One of those boxes contained a printed timeline, titled Phase 3, Shoreline Reclamation Plan. I gripped the phone tighter, and under your name," she continued, "they had handwritten notes, words like non-compliant, resistant, and one that turned my stomach, apply pressure via neighbors." I sank into my porch chair, staring out at the lake. My chest felt heavy, not with fear, but fury. They were targeting me directly. "They wanted to turn your neighbors against you, isolate you, force you into compliance," Gabriella said, her voice hardened. "But that plan just became evidence. The DA's filing charges tomorrow: mail fraud, falsification of records, conspiracy to commit annexation through deceit." For a long time, I didn't speak. The lake was still, catching the glow of the moon in silver streaks. And I thought about how fragile peace is, how easily someone can try to steal it with paper, lies, and intimidation. But standing there, I knew this much: they'd pushed too far. 2 days later, I walked my property line with a flashlight. Not because I expected more trespassers, but because I needed to remind myself why I was fighting. Every fence post, every oak tree, every ripple of that water, it was mine. Earned, protected. And no HOA in the world was going to change that. The civil case Gabriella filed moved fast. By the next week, I stood in a courtroom packed tighter than a church on Sunday morning. Patris, Hank, Cal, and half a dozen other neighbors filled the front row, silent but present. Support wasn't loud, but it was strong. Priscilla sat at the defense table, a shadow of herself. Her visor was gone, her confidence cracked. Beside her, an attorney in a navy suit shuffled papers with a look that screamed frustration. Gabriella stood with the kind of poise that only comes from knowing the truth is on your side. She laid it all out. Your Honor, Willow Creek HOA submitted a fraudulent annexation request to the county. They supported this request with forged documents, falsified invoices, and unauthorized maintenance logs. My client, Mr. Asher, never joined this HOA. He never signed an agreement. He never paid dues. Yet this board attempted to annex his land under false pretenses. The defense scrambled. This was a misunderstanding, the lawyer argued. My client believed the lake was unclaimed. She acted in the interest of environmental stewardship. Gabriella didn't even blink. Her voice cut like a knife. Then why forge a contract? Why submit maintenance logs with no verified service providers? Why send invoices to residents who never consented? The judge flipped through the packets Gabriella had prepared, every photo, every invoice, every sworn letter. 20 long minutes passed in silence, broken only by the rustle of pages. Finally, he looked up, his tone deliberate. The court finds that Willow Creek HOA acted outside the scope of its charter, engaged in fraudulent activity, and attempted to exert control over private property through deception. The annexation request is nullified. Furthermore, the HOA is prohibited from contacting, billing, or accessing Mr. Asher's property in any capacity. He paused. His next words were heavier. Additionally, this court refers the matter of forged documentation to the district attorney for further criminal prosecution. The gavel came down, and in that moment something shifted. This wasn't just about me anymore, it was bigger. Outside the courthouse, Gabriella turned to me. They'll try to spin this, she said. Blame it on a rogue board member, pretend it was a mistake. I shook my head. They can say whatever they want. I'm not here for their spin. I'm here to make sure they never try this again. And for the first time since the whole ordeal began, I felt the weight lift, just a little. But the fight wasn't over, not by a long shot, because that very week whispers began spreading through the neighborhood. Shredded documents, hidden accounts, projects that never happened. The storm wasn't ending, it was just beginning. I thought the gavel would end it, that the judge's ruling would slam the door on the whole scheme. But with people like Priscilla, endings don't come clean. They thrash, they claw. And when the mask finally cracks, what spills out is uglier than you ever imagined. It started with the shredder. Gabriella called me one evening, her tone sharp. They've been destroying records. I gripped the phone. Who? The former Willow Creek board. County investigators served a subpoena for 5 years of financial documents. When they arrived, the office was locked, and the paper shredder was still warm. They left behind bags of half-destroyed files. I sat back, staring at the lake, heart pounding. What were they hiding? You're not going to like it. Gabriella's voice dipped lower. Turns out the annexation scheme wasn't just about your lake. The HOA been collecting special assessment fees for projects that never happened. Shoreline dredging, pest control, path lighting. Tens of thousands of dollars, all rerouted through a shell landscaping company that doesn't exist outside a P.O. box downtown. And guess whose name is on the account? I didn't need her to say it, but she did anyway. Priscilla Markley. The fury that boiled in me wasn't just about my land anymore. It was about every neighbor cheated out of their hard-earned money. Retirees, families, people who trusted this HOA to protect their homes and got robbed instead. Gabriella's voice was steady. That's embezzlement. I've already filed with the state's Real Estate Fraud Division. The DA's looping in the Bureau of Investigation. 3 days later it happened. Federal agents raided Priscilla's house. By sunset, news vans were parked outside her cul-de-sac, cameras flashing, reporters swarming. I didn't watch the coverage. I didn't need to. Instead, I spent the evening at the sheriff's office, giving Carlo a full statement. Forged contracts, illegal dumping, falsified shoreline records. She cross-referenced my words with evidence from other cases now piling in. There's a digital trail, Carla muttered, flipping through a folder. Bank wires, time-stamped emails, even a Zoom recording where she calls you by name, calls you an obstacle, says you've got too much paperwork to neutralize. My laugh came dry, bitter. How poetic. Carla shook her head. They're charging her with wire fraud, conspiracy, and unlawful access of protected property, and that's just the beginning. Over the next month, subpoenas rolled out like thunder. 4 board members indicted for conspiracy. 2 flipped to save themselves, spilling details about the compost dumping and the fake shoreline maintenance logs. Turns out, it wasn't random harassment. It was a coordinated plan. The prosecutor laid it out plain during a press conference. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a calculated attempt to acquire private property under the guise of community improvement and to profit from it. The neighborhood buzzed with shock. Dozens of homeowners demanded refunds. Some filed lawsuits of their own. An elderly couple broke down at a community forum, crying as they admitted they paid over $20,000 in bogus fees over 3 years. Gabriella nudged me to speak at that same forum. I didn't want to, I wasn't chasing fame, but she insisted. They need to hear from someone who pushed back and won. So I stood on a folding stage, the lake just barely visible through the trees behind me, and I told the truth. I didn't go looking for a fight, I said, voice steady, carrying over the hushed crowd. I didn't pick this war, I just knew what was mine, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it away with a clipboard and a smile. No cheers, no applause, just silence. A long, heavy silence that felt louder than any standing ovation. Then slowly Cal, the retired Marine, stood in the crowd. Arms folded, chin high, he gave a single nod, and one by one others followed, not clapping, not chanting, just standing, a wall of quiet agreement. By summer's end, the HOA was gutted. A judge dissolved Willow Creek entirely. Its remaining assets, what little wasn't stolen, were rolled into a community trust. A new leadership committee was formed, clean, transparent, and limited. None of the old board members remained. The county even issued a permanent jurisdictional map. My lake and my acreage officially marked, forever outside the reach of any HOA, public record, permanent. As for Priscilla, the mask finally cracked for good. She accepted a plea deal, 5 years probation, 2 years house arrest, and full repayment of every stolen cent. At sentencing, the judge didn't mince words. Your actions were a betrayal of public trust, wrapped in the language of community service. She didn't look at me once, not in the courtroom, not outside, not ever again. And yet, even with her empire in ashes, I knew the fight had changed me, because this wasn't just about land anymore. It was about dignity, about refusing to bow when someone tried to rewrite the truth. That night, as I stood by the water, the cicadas humming, the lake calm and untouchable, I whispered something into the still air. They thought they could own this, but the truth doesn't bend, not for them, not for anyone. And for the first time in months I felt peace, not fragile, not threatened, real. But peace never lasts forever, and deep down I knew this story wasn't done. I thought it was over, the HOA dissolved, the lake safe, Priscilla shackled by probation and shame, but peace has a way of slipping through your fingers when you've fought a war like this. Because some battles don't end with a gavel, they echo, and the echo came fast. Gabriella called one morning, her voice edged with something I hadn't heard before. Worry. The investigators found more in the shredded files. I steadied myself. How bad? She didn't sugarcoat it. Worse than we thought, the annexation scam was just the surface. They'd been running shadow projects for years, charging homeowners thousands for improvements that never happened. Drainage systems, path lighting, even a shoreline dredging contract worth 6 figures. The money, all funneled through that same shell company, and the paper trail leads back to every member of the board. My chest tightened. So they weren't just trying to steal my land, they've been bleeding the whole neighborhood. Exactly, Gabriella said. This isn't local anymore. The Bureau of Investigation has the case. Wire transfers, fraudulent invoices, even emails tying it all together. They've got enough for conspiracy and racketeering. I stepped onto the porch, the lake stretching quiet before me, and let her words sink in. Racketeering, organized crime. This wasn't about community. It was about control and cash, and they'd been hiding it in plain sight. The fallout hit like wildfire. Neighbors who once kept their heads down came knocking, envelopes in hand, letters, threats, bogus invoices. One retired couple broke down on my porch. They paid nearly $20,000 for emergency pest control that never happened. I handed everything to Gabriella. She cataloged it, stapled it, and pushed it straight to the DA's office. Carla stopped by that evening, badge glinting under the porch light. "The state attorney general's involved now," she said, "and the feds aren't far behind. You'll want to be ready for subpoenas, maybe testimony." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Whatever it takes. Because at that point it wasn't about my peace anymore. It was about justice. The raids came swift. First the clubhouse, then individual board members' homes. Computers, hard drives, bank statements, all boxed up and hauled out. Priscilla's house became a circus of flashing lights and rolling news cameras. And while she withered under that glare, the cracks spread. 2 board members flipped. They turned state's evidence, spilling secrets in exchange for lighter sentences. Their confessions painted a picture worse than any of us imagined. The compost dumping, deliberate, a manufactured violation to frame my land as neglected. The forged maintenance logs, coordinated, a play to create proof of jurisdiction where none existed. And the worst part, they had phases, actual phases. In one seized binder was a timeline titled Expansion Initiative. My lake was Phase 3. But there were more, trails, lots bordering farmland, even a community park. I sat with Gabriella when she showed me. My hands shook as I turned the pages. "This was never about me alone," I muttered. "No," she said, "but you were the first one to push back, and that's why the whole thing is unraveling." The neighborhood was in shock. Meetings turned into shouting matches. Homeowners demanded answers, refunds, justice. One by one, stories spilled out. Families charged retroactive shoreline fees. Seniors threatened with liens if they didn't pay. Parents billed for playground maintenance that was never done. And through it all, the same truth echoed. The HOA had weaponized fear. They didn't need walls or chains. They used paper. Paper that could take someone's home, drain their savings, break their will. At the next community forum, I was asked to speak again. I didn't want to. I was tired. But when I stood at the microphone, looking at the sea of faces, some angry, some broken, I knew silence would be worse. "They told you compliance was the only way," I said. "They told you resistance meant punishment. They counted on your silence, but silence doesn't protect you, it buries you. And that's why they failed, because the truth has teeth, and once it bites, it doesn't let go." The room didn't clap. They didn't cheer. They just stood. The same quiet nods, the same wall of silent solidarity. And in that moment, I realized the fight wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to all of us. Weeks later, indictments dropped like dominoes. Mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, document forgery. The former HOA board was dragged into the light one by one. And though I knew justice was finally at our door, I couldn't shake the weight pressing against my chest. Because I'd seen the notes, the timelines, the careful, deliberate planning. And I knew, if I hadn't pushed back, if I hadn't installed that first camera, if I'd stayed silent like they wanted, I'd already be erased. That night I walked the shoreline with Cal, the Marine. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. We just stopped by the dock, staring at the still water reflecting the stars. "She picked the wrong guy to mess with," he finally muttered. I nodded. "No, she picked the wrong lake." And the silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was earned. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not in temperature, but in weight. The kind of air that presses down on your chest and makes you realize you're not just witnessing justice, you're standing in the middle of it. I sat on one side with Gabriella, calm as ever, her folders stacked like weapons. Behind us, the first row was filled with familiar faces, Patris clutching a notebook, Hank with his surveyor's maps, Cal with his arms folded tight across his chest. Ordinary people dragged into an extraordinary fight. Across the aisle, Priscilla sat stiff in her chair, her once perfect posture collapsed under the weight of months of exposure. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. Her attorney shuffled papers, jaw tight, eyes avoiding the stack of evidence that had already buried their defense. The judge entered, the gavel cracked, and Gabriella rose. "Your Honor, the case is simple," she began, her voice steady. "The Willow Creek HOA knowingly submitted a fraudulent annexation request. They supported this request with forged contracts, falsified invoices, and letters designed to intimidate private citizens into paying for services they never received. This was not an accident. It was not a misunderstanding. It was fraud. She held up one of the forged agreements, the fake contract with my name scribbled across it. My client never signed this, never authorized this, and yet this document was submitted to the county as fact. That is forgery. That is theft. The defense tried to fight. Your Honor, my client acted in good faith. She believed the lake was unclaimed. Gabriella cut him down without raising her voice. If that were true, why fabricate evidence? Why threaten residents with liens? Why bill them retroactively for services that never occurred? The judge leaned back, flipping through the thick binder Gabriella had prepared. 20 long minutes passed. The room was silent except for the shuffle of pages. Finally, his gaze lifted. The court finds that the Willow Creek HOA, under the leadership of Ms. Markley, engaged in systematic fraud, document falsification, and attempted annexation of private property through deceit. The annexation request is nullified. The HOA is hereby prohibited from contacting, billing, or accessing Mr. Asher's property in any capacity. Furthermore, the pause stretched, heavy as stone. This court refers the matter of forged documentation and fraudulent billing to the district attorney's office for criminal prosecution. The gavel struck, sharp and final. For a moment I didn't breathe. Then it hit me. This wasn't just a victory, it was vindication. Outside, Gabriella turned to me with that calm smile of hers. They'll try to spin it, she warned. Claim it was a rogue board member, say they didn't know. I don't care about their spin, I said. I care that they'll never set foot on my land again. And I meant it. But the story didn't end there, because within weeks the criminal charges followed. Wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy, even embezzlement. News crews swarmed the courthouse when Priscilla walked in for sentencing. The woman who once rode golf carts like a queen now shuffled past cameras in silence, eyes down, her lawyer whispering frantically at her side. I sat in the gallery as the judge read the sentence. 5 years probation, 2 years house arrest, full repayment of all misappropriated funds, and a permanent ban from holding any leadership position within a homeowners association. Priscilla didn't look at me, not once, not when the cuffs snapped on her wrists, not when the gavel came down, not when her empire crumbled around her. But I didn't need her to. Because justice isn't about their eyes meeting yours. It's about knowing the truth stood taller than the lie. The neighborhood changed overnight. The old board was dissolved by court order. A new leadership committee was installed, transparent, limited, accountable. They even sent me a letter of apology. I framed it and hung it in my shed, right beside the deed to my land, proof that some lines can't be erased. But the most powerful moment didn't happen in the courtroom or the papers. It happened weeks later when Petra stopped by with a basket of peaches. She handed me a folded letter. I thought you should see this. It was handwritten, an apology, not from Priscilla but from one of the former board members, the one who had signed off on the falsified maintenance logs. He admitted he'd been pressured, convinced that the ends justified the means. He ended with one line that hit harder than any gavel. You reminded me that lines matter. I kept the letter, not because I forgave him, but because it felt like the final stone in the wall I'd been building since the day that pink slip showed up on my mailbox. That fall, Cal and I built a bench by the dock. Nothing fancy, just cedar planks and galvanized bolts. We didn't talk much as we worked. When it was done, we sat there, staring at the water. You know, Cal said, voice low, she picked the wrong guy to mess with. I nodded slowly, the quiet settling deep into my bones. No, she picked the wrong lake. We didn't laugh, we didn't need to, the silence was enough. A silence that finally felt earned. The weeks after the sentencing were quiet, eerily quiet. The lake slipped back into its rhythm, the cicadas sang at dusk, and for the first time in months there were no golf carts, no trespassers, no pink slips fluttering on my mailbox. It was as if the chaos had never touched this place. But peace after war never feels the same. It's sharper, fragile, precious. One morning, I walked down to the oak tree where I'd mounted that first motion camera. The little lens that caught them in the act, my silent witness. I pulled it down, patched the hole in the bark, and stepped back. The tree didn't need to carry that burden anymore. Neither did I. For the first time in months, I let myself breathe without looking over my shoulder. The water rippled gently against the dock, unbothered by everything that had happened on its banks. It reminded me that the lake didn't care about politics or power. It just existed, pure, untouchable. But people are different. A week later, Petra stopped by again. This time she brought not peaches, but a smile that didn't look weighed down by fear. "The new committee's holding their first open meeting," she said. "They're publishing all the books, transparent, honest." I nodded, feeling a weight lift off her words. The neighborhood had been scarred, but it wasn't broken. Not anymore. That evening, I found myself flipping through a small pile of papers I'd kept tucked in the shed. The forged contract, the bogus invoices, the threatening letters stamped with the Willow Creek logo. They no longer filled me with anger. They filled me with something else, clarity. Proof that truth, no matter how buried, can be dug out. Then I unfolded the apology letter from that former board member. The one line stared back at me. "You reminded me that lines matter." It hit me then, this wasn't just about a lake. It wasn't just about one man standing against an HOA. It was about lines. The invisible ones that separate right from wrong, fair from foul, yours from mine. And how fragile those lines become when good people stay silent. That fall, I spent long evenings on the bench Cal and I built, staring out over the water. Neighbors would pass by sometimes, offering a wave or a nod. Not words, just recognition. We didn't need speeches. The silence between us carried more weight than any applause. One night, Gabriella called with the final update. "It's done. The restitution's been issued, the map filed, the trust established. The HOA is officially dissolved." Her voice softened. "You should know this case is already being used as precedent. Other HOAs, other counties, they're looking at it. Your fight didn't just protect your land. It set an example." I hung up, leaning back against the bench, eyes tracing the reflection of stars on the water. For the first time, the weight in my chest wasn't anger or fear. It was pride, not the loud kind, the quiet kind. The kind that comes when you know you stood your ground, even when it would have been easier to fold. Weeks later, as autumn painted the trees in streaks of gold and red, the lake looked more alive than ever. The water shimmered under the crisp sun, free from the shadow of false ownership. And I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to before. This wasn't just a victory. It was survival. Because they hadn't just tried to take my property. They tried to take my peace, my dignity, my place in the world. And when you let someone steal those things, you lose more than land. You lose yourself. But I hadn't lost. I'd won. And not because I fought louder, but because I fought longer. The last time Cal came by, he sat on the bench with me in silence. After a while, he said, "Most folks would have folded." "Most folks shouldn't have to fight like this," I answered. He nodded slowly. "True, but because you did, maybe fewer will." We sat there until the sun slipped below the trees, the lake catching its last light in golden streaks. Neither of us spoke again. We didn't need to. The lake was mine. The land was mine. But more than that, the story was mine. A reminder etched in every ripple of water, every whisper of the pines, every quiet night free of trespass and lies. Sometimes victory doesn't look like banners or cheers. Sometimes it looks like silence, like peace, like a line in the dirt that no one crosses again. And as I sat there, the water calm, the air still, I knew one thing for certain. Priscilla had picked the wrong man. She picked the wrong fight. And she'd picked the wrong lake. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one. The truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.